Maybe you remember exactly that moment. The first time he looked at you. It was no ordinary look. It wasn't just the look of a curious dog. It was something strange, almost disconcerting. As if, for a second, he already knew who you were. Some people say it happened like this. Among several puppies running, barking, jumping on everyone, one of them stopped. And he looked. No rush, no fear. As if waiting for just one thing, that you finally realized. Maybe something similar happened to you. Maybe you went into a shelter just to look. Maybe you went to visit a friend who had a litter. And suddenly, he was there, among everyone. But it didn't look like the others. Because while others were asking for attention, he just watched you. And when you got closer, he came straight to you, without hesitating, undoubtedly, as if that decision had already been made long before that meeting. Now think calmly. If you've ever had a dog that truly impacted your life, maybe you can remember little signs that, at the time, seemed coincidental. But today, they seem like something else. Maybe you remember how he started following you around the house. It didn't matter if you went to the kitchen, to the room, or just get a glass of water. A few seconds later, there were those little paws walking behind you, as if he needed to know where you were, as if your presence was too important to lose sight of. And then there was that look, that silent look every dog owner knows, the look that seemed to say, "I'm here," even when you didn't say anything, even when no one else seemed to understand you that day. If you've ever experienced something like this, maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about. But there is a question that almost no one asks. A question that can completely change the way you understand this story. And if that meeting, had it not been the work of chance? What if it hadn't been just luck? And if, in some way that we still can't fully explain, had your dog not just appeared in your life? What if, actually, had he chosen you? Because the more people tell their stories, another curious thing begins to appear. And when you notice this pattern, it is impossible to ignore a very strange sensation. Maybe that bond was never random. Maybe, from the beginning, he already knew you belonged together. And the most impressive thing is that many owners are only beginning to realize this after he leaves. But when that understanding finally arrives, she changes everything, including the way you understand the silence that remains in the house after he leaves. And that's exactly what we need to talk about now. Perhaps the hardest part to explain is precisely this: how a dog, without saying a single word, manages to occupy such a place, deep inside someone's life. Because, at first, everything seems simple. You think you're just looking out for him, giving food, taking it for a walk, cleaning up the mess, getting the house used to a new routine. But, without realizing it, something begins to happen silently. He learns the sound of your steps, learn what time you usually arrive, learn your way of opening the door. You even learn the days when you look good and the days when you're trying to look good. And that's when the bond stops being common, because it wasn't just you watching your dog. It was your dog studying your soul in his own way. Maybe you remember how he always knew when you were coming back, even before the key turns in the lock, even before any clearer noise. He was already there, waiting at the door, as if his heart heard something that his ears didn't hear. This is a memory that almost every owner carries. The scene is simple, but she stays. The door, the expectation, the wagging tail, the eyes lit up, that joy that seemed too big to fit in such a small body. And maybe that's why, after he leaves, the door to the house never seems exactly the same. Because it wasn't just a dog waiting. It was someone saying every day, without fail, "You're back, and that matters to me." Now think about another scene. You get up to drink water, go to the bathroom, change rooms for no reason. And a few seconds later, here he comes. No invitation, no rush, just to stay close. Many people don't even realize the power of this while they are living it. But when he remembers later, he understands. He wasn't just walking around the house. He was choosing you over and over again, every day. If you've ever had a dog like this, you might be looking back at these images right now. The place where he lay, the way he sighed near your feet, the way he laid his head on you to ask for anything. That silent look, almost impossible to translate. A look that required no explanation. He didn't ask questions. It didn't demand a better version of you. He just said, with a strange peace, "I know you, even when you hide." And perhaps that's exactly why the relationship with a dog is so important. Because in a world where almost everything needs to be explained, justified, or deserved, his love seemed to arrive in one piece, before any test, before any performance, before any mask. And let me ask you a very intimate question. How many times has your dog noticed your pain before anyone else? How many times did he approach you during the day when you were too silent? The day no one noticed? On the day when you just wanted some presence to stay close without asking anything? Many people will recognize this immediately, because this type of bond is not built with routine alone. It is built with presence, with repetition, with emotional loyalty, with small scenes that seem normal as they happen, but which later reveal the size of the love that existed there. And maybe that's why so many people, when they look back, feel the same thing. It didn't feel like he was just living with you. It seemed like he was carrying out some mission by his side. And when that idea starts to touch someone's heart, a new question appears, an even deeper question. If he was so present in every detail of your life, would his arrival? Was it really chance? But almost no one realizes the real dimension of this bond while it is still in place. Happening. The truth usually comes later, and it almost always arrives in silence. Not in poetic silence, not in the beautiful silence, but in that strange, heavy, disorganized silence. Who takes care of the house when he leaves? Because the pain of losing a dog does not enter a person's life as an idea. It enters as a concrete absence. She appears on the ground and no longer hears the sound of her paws. At the door that no one runs to welcome, in the corner of the house that still exists, but seems empty of meaning. Maybe you know this feeling well. You enter the house and for a second, you still wait, still look, still listens. As if some part of you refuses to accept that that habit is over. And maybe that's what hurts the most. It's not just his memory. It's the routine that was left unanswered. The automatic gesture of searching, the desire to call, the impulse to look at the place where he slept and find just the space. If you've been through this, you know that there are pains that almost no one really understands, because many people see a dog just as company. But anyone who lived this bond knows that it wasn't just that. It was an emotional presence. He was a witness to his life. It was someone who was there on ordinary days, on difficult days, on days when no one but saw what you felt. That's why loss is so confusing inside. You are not suffering just because an animal is gone. You are suffering because a form of love has disappeared from your visible routine. And that affects everything, with the body, with memory, with the house, with a sense of time. There are people who continue to hear the sound of their paws reflexively. There are people who avoid moving the bed. There are people who take a long time to remove the pot from its place. Not because it's weakness, but because the heart is still trying to negotiate with absence, still trying to understand how a house can continue to stand when one of the most vivid presences there is no longer there. And there is something even more painful about this. Sometimes a person feels like they have lost someone who knew them in a way few others know. People met. Someone who saw your pain without judgment, who recognized his condition just by the way he breathed, that approached without speech, without advice, without rush. It just stayed there. And sometimes that silent presence held more than the world knows. Maybe that's why mourning a dog has such a particular characteristic. He doesn't shout out, but it echoes inside, continuously, in little things, at tour time, in the sound of the gate, in the leftover food, on the collar kept, the feeling that some part of the house has suddenly aged. And let me ask you something that a lot of people feel, but almost never admit. Who did you become after he left? Because some losses don't just take one company. They leave a version of us looking back, a version that existed when he was still here, a version that was received at the door, followed by the house, observed with that silent gaze that seemed to understand everything. This is the point at which pain stops being just longing. It also becomes a search for meaning. Because when love has been so deep, the heart begins to resist the idea that everything it ended in nothing. And that is precisely where the conflict arises, most intimate of all. If his presence was so precise, if the bond seemed so impossible to explain, did his departure really end everything? Or are we trying to understand in the wrong way a connection that has always been greater? What did it look like? This is where a lot of people get stuck. Because feeling the pain of loss is already difficult, but admitting that that bond may have been deeper than normal, with a very intimate part of the soul. Most people have been taught to call anything that they cannot explain the meeting, the immediate connection, the feeling of recognition, the way a dog enters someone's life and, in a short time, seems to occupy a space that not even people could occupy. They call it luck, of coincidence, of attachment. But do these words really account for what happened? Because when you look closely at certain bonds, you begin to notice something disconcerting. Some dogs don't just arrive. They seem to come in exactly when they were needed. When the house was too empty, when the heart was too tired, when life had become too hard. And somehow, that presence begins to reorganize the person's breathing, mood of the house, the meaning of the days. Not magically, but in a real way. Concrete, silent. As if that animal had crossed the right path, at the right time. And it is at this point that a question arises that bothers and consoles at the same time. What if he didn't come into your life by accident? What if, among so many possibilities, among so many houses, among so many people, it was you? Not because there was leftovers, not because it worked out by chance, but because, in some invisible way, there was a connection being pulled between you. Think about it honestly. Why do some dogs cause affection and others cause recognition? Why are some loved, but others seem familiar from the beginning? Why, sometimes just a few seconds are enough for that impossible feeling of prove, but impossible to deny. The feeling that this meeting was not starting there. Maybe this has already crossed your mind and you have pushed the idea away so as not to seem exaggerated. But deep down, many people feel the same thing, especially after parting, especially when they look back at the entire story and realize how many details there seem to be a hidden meaning. The day they met, the way he chose you out of everyone, the way I followed you, the way he perceived his pain, loyalty without calculation, as if he wasn't just hanging out with you, as if he was accomplishing something. And here, there is a very strong internal conflict, because a part of the mind wants to simplify everything. It means it was just a loving animal, just a beautiful coexistence, just a phase that is over. But the heart resists, because the heart knows when it has experienced something that does not fit into the word just. And maybe that's why so many people keep asking the same question in silence. Why did he come just for me? This question is not born out of weakness. It is born from the perception that certain loves have direction, that certain presences have purpose, and that some encounters seem to carry more intention than chance. Pay attention to this, Perhaps what scares you most is not thinking that your dog chose you. Perhaps what scares the most is realizing that if this is true, then his departure. It also cannot be understood superficially, because if the arrival made sense, maybe his mission at your side had it too. And when a person begins to see this bond in this way, they are no longer just crying in absence. She's trying to decipher a promise. Perhaps this is why so many people are only beginning to understand the depth of this bond when something inexplicable happens. Not necessarily something big. Sometimes it's a detail, a feeling, a behavior on the last day, a different silence, a look that seemed to want to say more than the body already could. A woman once commented that on her dog's last night, he did something that I had never done it that way. Even though he was already weak, even though he couldn't walk properly, he insisted on going to the bedroom door. Her. It stopped there, waited. When she noticed, she got up and sat on the floor next to him. Then he laid his head on her lap and stared in silence. No fuss, no fear, just looking. She said it wasn't a look of pain. It was a strange look of calm, as if he was confirming something, as if, somehow, he wanted her to understand without words. I came here for you, and now I need you to be okay. The next morning he left, and what marked this woman most was not just the farewell. It was the feeling that that final gesture didn't seem random. Why, looking back, she started to remember everything. How he had arrived at a time when she was emotionally broken. How he spent years following her every step around the house. How he waited at the door, even on the days when she came back destroyed inside. How that dog seemed to understand what no one could. And then an idea began to grow inside her. Difficult to explain, but impossible to ignore. Maybe he hadn't been there just to live a life with her. Perhaps he had come to fulfill exactly that role. Sustain, to accompany, save, love, stay where you needed to stay. If you've ever lost a dog, perhaps this story touched some memories. Yours now. Perhaps you also remember a gesture that, at the time, seemed small. But today it seems full of meaning. One last look, one last approach, one last effort to stay close. And if this happened to you, write it here in the comments. What was your dog's gesture that you've never been able to forget to this day? Because when too many stories start to resemble each other on this emotional level, it becomes increasingly difficult to call all this a coincidence. And it is at this point that many people start looking for answers that are not cold. Answers that welcome the pain, but also help to see the spiritual meaning of this bond. Therefore, I need to open an important space here. If the pain of your dog's departure is still pressing, and you feel that this bond has been greater than a simple coexistence, there is an ebook that can help you understand this bond in more depth, bringing comfort, spiritual signs, and a new way of looking at the connection between souls and dogs. Because sometimes what hurts the most isn't just the longing. It's not being able to understand why such a great love came into your life, and why it marked his soul so much. And when a person begins to seek this answer with an open heart, they realize a very strong thing. Perhaps the story did not end at the moment of departure. Maybe that final look wasn't just goodbye. Perhaps it was the first clue that your bond was greater than time. And when that possibility appears, grief begins to change shape. When grief begins to change form, the person still misses it. You still miss it. He still looks at certain corners of the house with a heavy heart. But something new begins to be born in the midst of the pain. It's not forgetfulness. It's not denial. It's perception. The realization that some bonds do not come into our lives just to make us company. They come in to transform us. And perhaps this is the hardest and most beautiful revelation to accept. Some dogs don't just arrive to live by our side. They arrive to fulfill an emotional promise with our soul. It seems strong to say that, but think calmly. Not every encounter leaves a mark. Not every coexistence reorganizes a life from the inside. Not every presence can reach such deep parts of the human heart. But some dogs do just that. They appear when the person is injured. They stay when no one else understands. They create routine where there was emptiness. They create heat where there was silence. They create a bond where life had left fear. And without realizing it, the human begins to breathe differently. He starts to return home in a different way. You start to feel the world differently, because there is a huge difference between having an animal around and being emotionally saved by a presence that seemed to have come at just the right time. Maybe you know this feeling. Maybe, looking back at your story, you'll realize that your dog wasn't just someone who made you smile. Maybe he accompanied you during a period when you were losing yourself inside. Maybe he held on to parts of you that no one saw fall. Maybe it was a shelter on days that seemed impossible to cross. And that changes everything. Because when the bond has been so deep, the question is no longer just, why did he was it? The question becomes, what exactly did he awaken in me? This question opens a very important door, because it only takes away the gaze of absence and begins to reveal the mission. Not a grand mission in the theatrical sense, but an intimate mission. Silent. Sacred in the simple way it happens. Teach presence. Teach loyalty. Teach love without conditions. Teaching that being seen in silence is also a form of healing. And perhaps, above all, teach that certain bonds are not measured by how long they last, but for the part of the soul that they can touch. Keep this phrase, because it is the heart of this video. Your dog may not have come into your life by blind fate. He may have recognized you as part of his mission. This is the phrase that changes the meaning of everything. Change the first date. Change the common days. Change the way he followed you around the house. The look that seemed to understand even what you were hiding changes. Changes until farewell. Because if there was mission, then there was intention. If there was intention, there was meaning. And if there was sense, then your story cannot be reduced to chance. Now notice how this touches on a very sensitive point. Maybe your dog came to teach you something that would only be understood after he leave. Perhaps his presence was an answer to an old pain. Maybe his love was the purest way to show that you've never been so alone as I thought. And let me ask you another question that might really touch you. What if your dog's greatest gift was not just staying, but letting you in? Are you a mark that not even death could erase? Because that's when a lot of people start to understand. The match may interrupt physical presence, but you can't cancel what was recorded in your soul. And when this truth begins to be truly felt, longing is no longer just a wound. It starts to become a signal. When longing begins to become a signal, a silent change takes place within the person. The pain doesn't go away all at once, but it is no longer just an unanswered void, because the heart begins to consider a possibility that previously seemed distant. Perhaps the bond continues in a way that the eyes cannot see in the same way. And that doesn't mean making things up. It does not mean denying the reality of the loss. It just means recognizing that there are bonds so deep, so intense, and so transformers that physical absence cannot completely erase them. That's why so many people report the same feeling after the game. They can't explain it with complete logic, but they feel it. They feel that love didn't end like a common routine ends. They feel that some presence has been imprinted in the house, in the habits, in the heart, in the memory, more alive. Sometimes this appears when a person goes through a difficult day and remembers exactly what happened, the way he approached. Sometimes it appears in the automatic impulse to look at the door. Sometimes in the corner of the house that continues to carry a strange peace. And for many people, what starts as longing gradually turns into understanding. Some dogs leave the lap, but they do not leave the spiritual mission they carried out in life of those they loved. If this touches you deeply, write it here in the comments. Do you believe that the bond with a dog can continue beyond this life? Because when someone answers this from the heart, They are not just commenting. You are recognizing an intimate truth that you may have tried to keep quiet about for a long time. And this is exactly where many people notice a hidden pain. It's not just missing it. It's feeling like you've experienced something too big and not finding words, direction, or comfort enough to understand all of this. Therefore, I need to tell you something very sincerely. If this video is touching a wound that has not yet healed, and you feel who needs to better understand the signs, purpose, and spiritual continuity of the bond with your dog, the ebook can be an important step towards transforming confused pain into welcome, clarity, and hope. Because when the person understands that they have not gone crazy for feeling this bond as something bigger, she starts to breathe differently. You begin to look at your own history with more tenderness. You begin to realize that the love you received was not small, it was not banal, and it was not emotional waste. Maybe your dog didn't just come to accompany you for a while. Maybe he came to leave you with a certainty. That certain encounters do not end where the body ends. And when that certainty begins to dawn, the silence of loss no longer sounds the same. And maybe that's why, after a while, the strongest memory isn't just that of farewell, but the one at the beginning, that first look, that moment when, without any logical explanation, you felt there was something different there. At first, it seemed like just a date, just a beautiful moment, just another dog coming into your life. But now, after everything, after coexistence, love, shared routine, loss, and silence, maybe you can see this scene with different eyes. Maybe that look was never simple curiosity. Perhaps that approach was never random. Perhaps, from the first moment, he already knew exactly where he needed to be. Like you. In your house. In your story. In your pain. In the part of your life that no one saw completely. Because some encounters don't arrive with a bang. They arrive in the form of presence, of constancy, of silent loyalty. And when they leave behind more than just nostalgia. They leave emotional traces that remain alive long after the last day. Maybe you still remember the sound of Pa's S around the house, just the way he waited at the door, from the place where he slept, from the silent look that seemed to understand everything without asking for an explanation. Those memories don't hurt as much because they're gone. They hurt because they were too real, because they touched too deep. Because they changed something in you that didn't go back to the way it was before. And perhaps that is precisely where the answer your heart has been looking for lies. It wasn't destiny. It was your dog's choice. Choose to stay. Choose to accompany you. Choose to love yourself in the purest language there is. Choose to fulfill, by your side, a mission that you may only be able to understand through whole little by little. And this is the deepest part of all. Maybe death took the physical presence, but he did not take the truth of the bond, didn't take the mark. You didn't take what he awakened in you. You didn't take the love that was built between you in silence, on ordinary days, on small gestures, in loyalty that asked for nothing in return. If you felt this video in your heart, write your dog's name in the comments. Let's leave this name registered here as proof that certain ties are still alive, in the memory, in the love, and in the spirit of those who stayed. Because sometimes what we call nostalgia, it's just love trying to find a new way to stay. And perhaps, at some level, that the eyes cannot yet reach. The one who followed you around the house, waited for you at the door, and looked at you as if he already knew you, your soul. Still know exactly where you are.